Dr. Luiza Petre is going to join us momentarily. She is a board-certified cardiologist. She's a wonderful person. She's joined us on Liquid Lunch many times before. And when we get Luiza Petre, we got to dig in to her extensive talent. She's a health and nutrition expert.
Hello.
But Dr. Petre, she's going to join us momentarily.
Hello.
And she is going to give us some very interesting statistics.
Hold on. I can't hear you. Can you hear me?
Related to a study that was done in California. Now, I talked to you last week about how Bill Gates was pictured on the internet with a stack of books, and one of them was How to Lie with Statistics. Okay? So the numbers on this whole COVID cases, deaths, affected, cured, recovered, all the numbers are skewed. They're all whacked out because we only know how many cases there are by people who actually presented themselves and were able to get a test and then got a test and found. So there are vast parts of cities and states and like 99% of the country who've not been tested. But Dr. Petre is going to join us here in just a couple of minutes, and she's going to shatter, I think, with some of the stats she's talking about, the normal way people are looking at this right now, because there's a study out there in California that the doc is going to break down for us that apparently somewhere like the numbers that are being reported as cases are being underreported by maybe a factor of 50 times. And to talk about it with us right now, we're joined by Dr. Luiza Petre. Hi, doctor. How are you?
Hi. Can you hear me?
I hear you, and I saw you for a minute, but you turned the camera around, I think. You got to flip the camera around.
Okay, how is
there
that?
you
Okay.
are. Hello.
Some technical difficulties here.
Greetings.
Good to see you back.
Great to see you. So, Doc, I gave a little preliminary intro, but I'd love to get your take on it. Apparently, there's a antibody study going on in California that may have some evidence that the numbers that we're seeing in cases could be underreported dramatically.
Yes, John, we already had evidence of multiple studies done in parallel. The first one was in California, in Los Angeles, and they looked at 3,300 residents. And in that area, they learned that actually, in average, 3-4% of population, but 50 times underestimated the number of people exposed to COVID. However, when we did a similar study in New York and we had the preliminary results last week, we have learned that actually in New York, in particular in New York City, the rate of infections were 1 in 5. So basically 21% of population in New York City were already exposed. However, let's look at this a little bit more in granular. First of all, it varies from territory to territory. If you look at Long Island, that was around 17 percentile, Westchester 11 percentile. So each territory has its own rate of spread, and of course it has to do with population density. Also, what we've learned that these tests are not all of them as accurate as described. 50 scientists already are working with FDA to determine how valid they are. We have learned so far that out of the 14 tests out there commercially available, only 3 were able to diagnose correctly the antibodies above 95 percentile. And that's a number we need for accuracy. So these are the challenges we are facing. So besides we have a different spread in different territories, keep in mind that this is just a snapshot in time. And this changes, like a month from now, we'll have different numbers. We need multiple pictures to create a movie, right? To understand how fast we're moving and where this spread is. And again, yes, we underestimated the number of cases. 1 in 5 New Yorkers are positive, but we still have 4 New Yorkers at risk. And what do we do about that?
Got it. So here in New York, I think what they say, they were testing about 2,000 people a day for antibodies, and 20% of the people that they tested had already some trace of these antibodies. Do you think that number could be more widely, could be underreported also as we widen the testing net?
Again, it could be underreported for one reason. What they tested, they went to grocery stores and they took samples of people, shoppers, and people who are working in the grocery stores. But keep in mind, we have old children, we have all these elderly people who are in strict lockdown. Those probably were not represented in that group. So if you think that way, you might actually overestimate the numbers. But if you look at people who are really exposed and they are frontliners. Right now, actually, they are doing a second stage of the same antibody study, and they are looking at only healthcare providers, police officers, EMT, and also at mass transit workers, which are really people on the front line and very highly exposed. So we might gather different information and different numbers if we look at those. So at the end, as I said, we need multiple snapshots. We need multiple testing in time to understand and kind of create an average and understand really how spread this virus. But number one, mortality is much lower than we thought. It's somewhere between 0.5 to 1% for New York, which is very good if you compare with Italy, where they are above 10%. Secondly, yes, we definitely underestimate the spread of this virus, but how this is going to guide us in the future is unclear, because how fast are we going to reach that point, critical point, where we can really relax the lockdown? It's where like 50% of population would be positive. That's called herd immunity. So that'll be a critical point. But meanwhile, we are still going to see a lot of people dying. Yes, it's less than 1%. We don't have a cure for that. And this number is only guiding us.
So it's safe to say if we're at 20% right now with limited testing, if they open that up to kids and elderly folks, we'd probably have a larger body of people. And you said, if I have it right, if we get to 50%, that's the first stage of herd immunity?
Correct. And look, it's simple math here. In order for a viral to grow exponentially, it needs to spread to more than one person. So it cannot be just one-to-one transmission, right? It has to be 1 to 2, 1 to 3, so it grows in the population. But the moment you reach half of population immune, you can reach that more than one factor of spreading. So that's what is called herd immunity, when basically a virus can starve on its own. Yes, it still continues to spread, but it cannot grow anymore as fast as before. Basically, it's going to plateau on its own and it's going to decline.
So on a theoretical, the assumption is if 1 out of 2 people have it, unless there's some outlying condition where 2 of the people who don't have it meet each other, then we've eliminated the exponential growth. If you assume that every time a non meets a positive, then it can't get past the positive, because if they speak to someone else, there's a 50-50 chance that they'll already be positive. So the exponential part of it is what makes it a pandemic.
That's correct. And we still don't know that 50% number would work, because it kind of varies from virus to virus. Some would argue might need to be 60%. So, but we are close to that number. And as I said, the question remains, how do we get to that 50% immunity when we don't have a vaccine? And if we need to go through this the natural way, like 50% of people to get the disease, we still have a lot of fatalities, even if it's less than 1%. It's a high death toll.
Doctor, I know you're a very classy person. You're a very classical person in many ways.
Thank you.
Do you think that, if you look at, just traditional ways of dealing with things like this, do you think that the government did a good job by being so stern with the social distancing and shelter in place and then extending it? Do you think that had a big contribution to slowing the spread?
I definitely think that helps, because this is simple. It's contagious unless we prevent that contact and I would say, mobility, social mobility between people, yes, you can definitely influence the spread. But also, the main concern we had early on is how fast we overwhelm the hospitals. Because in Italy, the moment they reached that capacity, mortality skyrocketed. So maybe that's why we have such low mortality in New York, because we have never reached that threshold, and we're good about keeping the cases in control at a slow pace. So definitely that helped. But looking forward, I guess we still have to keep some social distancing for a long time, and we do the best we can at this point. Like we learn as we go every day.
Well, thank God we have you to break it down for us because, sometimes on some of these media shows, they're talking about 18 months from now, we could have another wave and we could have millions. And I think, a lot of these preliminary measures may have walked us into a slower phase of getting to that herd immunity. And when those, non-nons meet, then they go to the hospital. There's not an overload of thousands of other people going at the same time. So we may have normalized the capacity utilization for hospitals. Is that part of it?
Correct. So I think that was a great achievement, at least for New York. We're able to slow down the pace. And as I said, we learn as we go. We have different disease prediction models. And as we learn more about this antibody testing and the spread, we keep readjusting these projections as we go.
Doc, how come they can't? I don't really understand it, but how come they can't just come up with a test where you can take a little swab out of your mouth or put a little prick in your finger at home and it gives you like a pregnancy test and it gives you an answer right there? What's the real gating issue for that happening?
It's a great thought you have, and actually, I do believe we'll get there. It's just a matter of time. Right now, a lot of companies are racing to develop this kind of testing, but we made progress. We do have the antibody finger prick testing where you actually go and have like a sugar test. You check on your finger, you take a droplet of blood, and you can determine if someone has antibodies or not. So we already have that. Yes, it's not for home use yet, like people monitor their sugar, but I think it's going to happen soon. And also, we made second progress with self-testing kits where people can actually go at home, collect saliva in a tube, and mail it back to the laboratory. And LabCorp has that available already, but it's not widely available for population. Right now, it's been just for healthcare workers.
Right, but what's the difference with just like a home, glucose test, for diabetic? They pop their finger, they put it on the strip, they put it in the meter, and it tells you whatever reading. They keep talking about this word reagents. Is it the lack of reagents? Is the lack of equipment that can read the certain string? I'm confused why we have the technology in other areas. It can't be harnessed into this.
Correct, but the way we do the testing, it's not as simple as a pregnancy test. Maybe one day it will get there, but right now that particular strip with the blood you have collected from that finger prick still has to be entered and analyzed in a machine. And when we talk about reagents, we are talking about what that machine requires to analyze that quickly. Like if you do a flu test, you do need to put into a machine to read that test for you. It's different than pregnancy tests. So that's what actually it takes more than just a little strip.
Got it. Okay. And then finally, there's all this noise out there about how, there's this big global cabal that wants to vaccinate everyone. And there are other people saying that we'll have a vaccination in 6 months. Others are saying we'll have a vaccination in 18 months. I had one experience. I only got a flu shot once in life. And I had a terrible experience for 2 days after that. Do you think a vaccine is the only answer, or could people just kind of get these antibodies by regular herd immunity?
Well, as I said, there are two options. You can get immunity in the population by exposure, but we might not want to try that path with COVID-19 just because it has a high mortality rate, right? So you might not want to try that, having so many people dying. The second option to reach herd immunity is through vaccination. And I understand you had some symptoms when you got your flu shot, but keep in mind that the moment you receive a vaccine, your body starts behaving like you have been exposed to a tiny dose of the virus. So that's probably you had those symptoms, but that's the way you built immunity and you created a defense mechanism. So regarding COVID-19, if you have to choose between, I don't know how I'm going to react if I have this virus. We've seen that young and old end up in the hospital. I might just be okay with feeling sick for 2, 3 days, and I wouldn't care.
Okay. All right. Well, then that's fair enough. And I'm just wondering, if I don't know where I am in the debate, but I feel like the more and more and more as a country we've vaccinated kids, we're finding more and more things that kids are afflicted with that weren't around before. So I wonder if we're, over vaccinated, but I guess this is the newest scare and we got to take whatever precautions we can.
I hear your point, but right now you have to choose between a disease with a high mortality rate, and also we have to choose how fast these vaccines will be available. So going back to your point, of course, there's a concern about safety of this vaccine. That's why it takes so long to prove they are safe.
Got it. All right. Well, Dr. Luiza, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate you being with us on Liquid Lunch. And hopefully when this is all over, we can have you back in the studio and have some fun like we used to.
Thank you for having me, and stay safe.
Thank you. I'll do my best. That's Dr. Luiza Petre. She's a classical woman. She's a great guest. And, I feel calm when I have doctors like her on my show because I know she doesn't have any political leanings that she needs to, portray some kind of narrative or something, because Dr. Luiza is just a great person. And she's one of the most brilliant guests I think I've had on the show in a while. So, when I have her on, I'm happy because, I feel like we're getting some real down-home info for you without the political spin.